There is an assertion that appears quite frequently whenever the press reports on phone, social media, or financial investment scams, that the elderly are the most easily scammed group. This assertion sounds reasonable because many incidents causing thousands of dollars in damages, or even tens of thousands of dollars, involve retirees or older adults. However, if one only stops at that conclusion, they will miss the essence of the problem. Age does not automatically turn a person into a victim of a scam. What makes the elderly frequently become targets does not lie in their lack of intelligence or lack of experience, but rather in the fact that scammers have spent years researching how to exploit the psychological, cognitive, living situation, and behavioral changes of this demographic. In other words, this is not a story about the vulnerability of the victim, but a story about the evolution of the criminal. To understand why the elderly are frequently targeted, it is first necessary to correctly perceive the nature of scams. Many people assume that scamming is primarily the act of stealing information or taking advantage of ignorance. In reality, the majority of modern scams do not begin with technology, but rather begin with psychology. In the field of cybersecurity, the concept of social engineering, psychological manipulation engineering, is used to refer to the methods that make victims voluntarily provide money, passwords, or personal data, without hackers needing to bypass technical security layers. This shows that the true target of the scammer is not a phone, a bank account, or an application, but rather how people think and make decisions. Upon understanding the psychological mechanisms of the victim, they can design scenarios that have a very high success rate. From that perspective, the question, "Why are the elderly easily scammed?" needs to be replaced by another, more accurate question. What makes psychological manipulation tactics achieve higher effectiveness on many older adults? It is this shift in how the question is framed that helps shift the focus from blaming the victim to analyzing the operational mechanisms of the criminal. One of the most important factors is the change in cognition as people enter the advanced age stage. This is a phenomenon that has been studied for decades by neuroscientists and psychologists. It must be emphasized that cognitive aging is not synonymous with a loss of thinking ability. In reality, the knowledge accumulated over many years, the ability to solve familiar problems, and life experience are usually still maintained quite well. What changes more visibly is the processing speed of new information, the ability to switch between multiple tasks simultaneously, and the capacity to detect unusual signs in unprecedented situations. This difference has tremendous significance for modern scams. A person accustomed to traditional transactions might be very good at evaluating the credibility of the opposite person when meeting face-to-face. However, when having to distinguish an impersonated bank call created by AI technology from a real call, prior experience no longer exerts its effect as before. The rules that once helped them make correct decisions for many years suddenly become ineffective in a completely new environment. Studies on cognitive aging also point out that as people age, the ability to simultaneously process multiple sources of information tends to decrease. This is something that scammers exploit very thoroughly. They rarely make a simple request. Instead, they create multiple pressures at once. The phone rings continuously, the person on the line claims to be police or the court, announces that the account is related to a case, demands absolute secrecy, and simultaneously urges the immediate transfer of money to prove one's innocence. When having to absorb too much information in a very short time, even those with high educational backgrounds can make the wrong decision. It is worth noting that this mechanism does not only occur in the elderly. Studies in behavioral psychology show that anyone, when falling into a state of stress, will also experience a decrease in critical thinking ability. The difference is that many young people are accustomed to the fast pace of information on the internet, and therefore tend to adapt better to the digital environment. Meanwhile, quite a few older adults still approach technology using rules formed from many decades ago. It is exactly this gap that creates an advantage for the scammer. If only explaining through cognitive factors, it is still not enough. A deeper cause lies in social trust. Each generation matures in a different historical context, and therefore also builds different standards for evaluating the person opposite them. Many elderly people grew up in a period when impersonating state agencies over the phone was almost non-existent. They are accustomed to police wearing uniforms, officials working at headquarters, banks transacting face-to-face, and documents having a seal as signs of authenticity. In that environment, trusting a representative of public authority is not naivety, but rather a reasonable social rule. The problem arises when the old rule is applied to a new environment. Today, some subjects can use technology to spoof phone numbers, forge documents, create websites closely resembling official websites, or even create deepfake videos. The signs that were once considered evidence of trustworthiness can now be replicated at a very low cost. This causes many people to continue using evaluation criteria that are fundamentally no longer suitable for the digital age. Because of this, it would be unfair to say that the elderly are more gullible than the youth. In essence, they are using a set of rules formed in an environment where the level of fraud was much lower compared to the present. When the environment changes too quickly, every generation needs to update how they evaluate information. The youth have an advantage because they grew up with the internet, whereas older adults must learn a completely new system after many decades of being accustomed to the old system. Alongside the change in cognition and trust, the emotional factor also plays a particularly important role. The majority of successful scams do not cause victims to act out of greed, but out of fear or love. This is a point that many people often overlook. When hearing news of a child or grandchild getting into an accident, few are still calm enough to verify every detail of the call. When receiving a notification that a bank account is related to money laundering, the first reaction of many people is anxiety, rather than suspicion. Scammers understand this very clearly, so they always try to create an intense emotional state before asking the victim to execute a transaction. In psychology, this phenomenon is called the influence of emotion on the decision-making process. When humans experience a state of fear or panic, the brain tends to prioritize rapid responses instead of careful analysis. This once helped human ancestors survive against natural dangers. However, in the modern environment, that mechanism becomes a weakness. Scammers do not need to threaten with force. They only need to make the victim believe that they are in an emergency situation. There is a notable paradox that the more a person loves their family, the easier it sometimes is for them to become a target of relative impersonation scenarios. Many incidents recorded in multiple countries show that just one call with the content, "I am in the emergency room, need money transferred immediately," is enough to make the victim skip minimal verification steps. In recent years, the development of artificial intelligence has also made this trick become more dangerous, as technology can simulate voices with a very high degree of likeness, just from a short audio recording taken from social media. Another factor that is less mentioned but has a massive impact is loneliness. According to the World Health Organization, social isolation and feelings of loneliness are increasingly common issues among the elderly, especially in large urban areas or in families where descendants go to work far away. Loneliness not only affects mental health, but also changes the way people evaluate new relationships. Scammers understand that better than many people think. They do not always ask for money right in the first contact. On the contrary, many scam rings spend weeks or months to build trust. They ask about health, share about life, tell empathetic stories, and create the feeling that the victim has someone genuinely caring for them. Only after the relationship is solid enough does the request to transfer money or invest appear. These romance scams have become a global phenomenon. According to many reports by the FBI and the U.S. Federal Trade Commission (FTC), this is one of the formats causing the greatest financial damage to citizens. It is worth noting that many victims have high educational levels, have been successful in their careers, and possess substantial wealth. This shows that the decisive factor is not intelligence, but rather the fact that emotions have been built strongly enough to weaken the capacity for suspicion. It also needs to be acknowledged that older adults usually have another characteristic making them attractive targets. They possess assets accumulated after many years of labor. From the perspective of criminal economics, this is a very simple calculation. If investing the same time to approach two victims, one person only having a few $100s in their account and one person having a life savings, the scammer will almost certainly prioritize the second target. In other words, criminals do not just look for people who are easy to scam, but also look for those bringing the highest profit. This opens up an important perspective. The elderly are not just targeted because of their vulnerable points, but also because they are a group with economic value to scam rings. It is exactly the combination between the capacity for asset accumulation, the gap with technology, and psychological changes that has made them the most meticulously researched target. Understanding that is the first step to explaining why scams aimed at the elderly still constantly appear, despite warning campaigns being deployed in many countries. If viewed from the perspective of criminal economics, it can be seen that scam rings do not operate based on emotion, but rather on the logic of profit maximization. They continuously test many different scenarios, track the success rates, adjust their approaches, and focus resources on the groups yielding the highest effectiveness. This is the reason fraud formats are increasingly being personalized. The youth usually receive invitations for cryptocurrency investment, work-from-home recruitment, or trading on e-commerce platforms. Middle-aged people easily become targets of investment, insurance, or loan programs. Meanwhile, the elderly frequently receive impersonation calls from state agencies, hospitals, banks, or invitations related to healthcare. Each age group has a distinct script, built based on their own habits, needs, and weaknesses. This raises a thought-provoking question. Are the elderly truly the most easily scammed group, or just the group bringing the highest profit margin? The answer perhaps lies at the intersection between the two factors. If only considering the number of incidents, some studies in the US show that the youth also report a great many cases of being scammed online. However, when considering the value of assets misappropriated, older adults usually suffer larger losses. The cause is not only because they have more savings, but also because once they trust, they tend to transfer large sums of money at once instead of smaller amounts. It is this exact characteristic that makes scam rings willing to invest a lot of time to build trust before striking. Another factor that completely changed the landscape in the last few years is the development of artificial intelligence. Previously, a scam call often revealed many unusual signs such as a robotic reading voice, unnatural speaking manner, or superficial information. Currently, AI voice generation technology can simulate a person's voice very closely, just from a short audio recording. If someone frequently posts videos on social media, the audio data to create a voice clone is almost always readily available. This has given rise to a dangerous form of scam, faking a relative's voice to call for help. Imagine an older adult receiving a call with a voice identical to their child or grandchild. The person on the line says that they just caused an accident, are being held at the police station, or need money for emergency surgery. In that circumstance, the first reaction of the majority of parents or grandparents will be to find a way to help, rather than opening a browser to check whether AI technology can fake a voice or not. This is exactly the most dangerous point of the new technologies. They do not create a new weakness in humans, but they turn inherent natural emotional reactions into a tool for criminals to exploit. Not just stopping at voice, deepfake technology also allows the creation of fake images and videos with increasingly high realism. Even though the quality is still not perfect in all cases, the developmental trend of the technology shows that distinguishing real, fake will become harder and harder. This is synonymous with the fact that advice like "trust what you see" will no longer be sufficient. In the digital environment, images, sounds, and text can all be forged at a low cost. Therefore, the most important principle is no longer seeing is believing, but rather always verify through an independent channel. From another angle, the explosion of social media also unintentionally creates favorable conditions for criminals. Many people publicly share their date of birth, address, names of children and grandchildren, family photos, travel itineraries, or personal events. With such an amount of information, a scammer can build a very convincing script. When calling, they do not speak generic sentences, but specifically mention relatives' names, home addresses, or details that only acquaintances would know. It is this very accuracy that makes the victim believe the caller definitely has a real connection to their family. In reality, this is not a technological miracle, but rather the result of exploiting public data combined with leaked information from many different sources. In many incidents, personal data has appeared on information trading forums, or been exposed after attacks on enterprise systems. When piecing the data fragments together, criminals can create a fairly complete profile of the victim. This indicates that safety against scams does not only depend on the caution of each individual, but also relates to how organizations protect customer data. However, it would be a one-sided perspective if only focusing on the elderly. In fact, the youth are also victims of very many sophisticated forms of scams. They are lured into investing in non-existent projects, tricked into transferring money to get online jobs, have their social media accounts hijacked, or lose money when trading on fake platforms. The difference lies in the fact that the tricks are adjusted to suit each group. Young people are usually more confident when using technology, but are easily attracted by speed, convenience, and expectations of high profitability. Older adults are more cautious in many transactions, but might place a lot of trust in symbols of prestige like uniforms, titles, or seals. In other words, no generation is immune to scams. Only the method of exploitation changes, according to the characteristics of each group. Because of this, labeling older adults as easily scammed can create unintended consequences. First of all, this viewpoint unintentionally shifts the responsibility onto the victim, instead of focusing on the criminal act. When a scam happens, many people react with sentences like, "Who told them to be so gullible?" or "so old yet still getting scammed." Such comments do not help prevent crime, but on the contrary, make many victims ashamed and afraid to report it. According to criminological studies, the rate of victims not reporting scams remains at a substantial level, especially when they fear being judged by others or losing trust from their family. This makes it difficult for authorities to detect new tricks early and creates conditions for scam rings to continue operating. A more effective approach is to view scams as a problem of the social ecosystem. In that ecosystem, responsibility does not only belong to the individual, but also belongs to the family, technology enterprises, banks, regulatory agencies, and the community. If only asking citizens to stay vigilant, the effectiveness will be very limited, because humans cannot maintain a state of absolute vigilance in all situations. Instead, there needs to be supplementary protective layers built, so that even when a person makes a mistake, the consequences can still be minimized. For the family, the important thing is not to control every decision of older adults, but rather to create verification rules that are simple and easy to execute. For instance, it can be agreed upon that any request to transfer large sums of money must be confirmed via at least one direct call to the relative, using a previously saved phone number. The family can also establish a safe password that only true relatives know, to use in emergency situations. These measures sound simple, but are actually very effective against AI voice impersonation formats. For banks and financial institutions, strengthening authentication layers in unusual transactions can help significantly reduce risks. Many countries have tested systems for detecting transactions with signs of being manipulated. For example, when an elderly customer suddenly transfers all of their savings to an unprecedented account. In such cases, the bank can temporarily delay the transaction for further verification. Of course, these measures need to be carefully designed, aiming to balance between the client's right to self-determination and the goal of protecting them from fraud. Technology enterprises also play a not insignificant role. Social media platforms, messaging applications, and telecommunication services have the capability to detect fake accounts, suspicious calls, or large-scale scam campaigns, if investing adequately in technology and moderation processes. This is not an absolute solution, because criminals are always changing tactics, but it can significantly increase the operational costs of scam rings and reduce the number of victims. At the state level, updating the legal framework and strengthening international cooperation are becoming increasingly necessary. Many scam rings operate across borders, use servers located abroad, and break down the stages from data collection, making calls and receiving money, to money laundering. This makes investigation become far more complex compared to traditional crimes. Therefore, alongside dealing with the directly participating subjects, there needs to be a collaborative mechanism among countries in sharing information, freezing cash flows, and tracing the organizations behind them. Even so, all technical and legal solutions will only be effective if accompanied by the enhancement of citizens' digital capabilities. The concept of digital literacy nowadays is no longer purely knowing how to use a smartphone or access the internet. It encompasses the ability to evaluate the reliability of information, recognize the signs of psychological manipulation, understand how personal data is exploited, and know how to verify before making a decision. In a context where technology changes very rapidly, this skill needs to be seen as a part of lifelong learning, not only for students but for all ages. After examining the cognitive, psychological, technological, economic, and social factors, a more balanced conclusion can be drawn. The assertion scamming the elderly is the easiest contains a part of the truth, but if understood in an absolute sense, it is incorrect. The elderly are not always the most easily scammed group, nor is every older adult easily victimized. What is truer is that they are usually the group meticulously researched and targeted by scammers because of the combination among many factors. The natural changes of the aging process, the gap with digital technology, the level of accumulated assets, the need for social connection, and the standards of trust formed in a different historical context. More importantly, the nature of the problem does not lie in age, but lies in the disparity between the evolution speed of criminals and the adaptation speed of humans. The more technology develops, the more sophisticated scam methods become, and the boundary between real and fake becomes increasingly fragile. This means that anyone can become a target, if lacking knowledge or falling into the exact circumstance that criminals have prearranged. Today, the victim could be a retiree. Tomorrow, it could be a tech engineer, an entrepreneur, or a student who just entered the labor market. The difference does not lie in intelligence, but rather in who is possessing the weakness fitting the script that the scammer chooses. Perhaps because of that, the initial way of questioning also needs to be changed. Instead of asking, "Why are the elderly easily scammed?" a more worthy question to ask is how to build a society where everyone, at any age, has sufficient knowledge, tools, and support to avoid becoming victims of increasingly sophisticated forms of manipulation. When shifting the focus from judging the victim to analyzing the criminal's mechanisms and the community's defensive capabilities, we not only understand this phenomenon more correctly, but also have the opportunity to create more effective and sustainable solutions in the future.